The Green Crow Inn, a novel by Derek A. Kamal, read by Kelman Friedman. Chapter 15. Wounds, Real and Spoken. I did not bother waking with the guests or seeing to the horses. I later found out that Gilrad had dashed off to the stable, the livery, as he'd mistakenly called it, the very moment he awoke. Seeing and hearing our fight, along with most of the rest of the inn, he wanted to impress Kalka and apparently get on her good side as swiftly as possible to show what a fine stable hand could do. I rolled over and slept through breakfast. What woke me was not a sense of duty, but a knock on my door. It slipped open, and Sumi Kind summoned me to the innkeeper's office. In stiff defiance against my groggy head and the arrival of a weighty depression, I rose and shuffled down the hallway. The corridor had a strange look to it as light from open room doors and from the stairwell streamed in to create splotches in the darkness of the otherwise unlit space. I could smell fruit stewing in the kitchen below. When I climbed the stairs and entered Kalka's office, I sat without being asked and sulked, probably appearing like a student who'd been dragged into the presence of the headmaster. I stared at the sword that still hung on the wall. Then my mood brightened, if only by a degree, when it was Sumi who spoke first rather than Kalka. "Now, Torsen," she said, "Kalka has something to say to you, and I expect you to be listening." My eyes widened, and I felt a little shocked. All grogginess fled my body. Was Sumi running this meeting? Quickly composing myself, I nodded and adjusted my posture. I summoned the nerve to bring myself to look at her, and Kalka appeared nonplussed. "Torsen," she said, "I'm sorry I called you a thief." Sumi Kind cleared her throat, but stared out the window. "And," Kalka forced herself to say, "I'm sorry I said I would strike you." My level of shock pierced the roof and reached the stars. Here was Kalka apologizing to me. Perhaps I could keep this job a bit longer. "Thank you, Kalka," Sumi said diplomatically. "That was being very brave of you. Would you like to be saying anything else? Anything, perhaps, that we were discussing just a moment ago?" Kalka blinked hard. Her mouth was pursed, and she shook her head in disbelief, but spoke nonetheless. "So, Torsen, when you undermine me and make assumptions about me, especially about my past, about my romantic interests, it makes me feel angry." Sumi looked at the innkeeper and raised her eyebrows. Kalka sighed again. "It makes me feel hurt." Sumi cleared her throat. Kalka's eyes fluttered. "And misunderstood." "Thank you, Kalka," Sumi said. "I'm appreciating your candor." Our employer, beggaring belief, appeared to blush slightly. "Torsen," the dwarf turned to me. "What would you like to say to Kalka?" A few jokes came to mind, along with a short list of biting remarks, but I determined to do what was expected of me, if only for Sumi Kind. Shifting in my seat again, I made my attempt. "Kalka, I'm sorry for prying, and for making assumptions about you, and for calling you names." The last sentence was said quickly. Sumi cleared her throat, again keeping her eyes fixed on the window and the clear winter day beyond it. Kalka's office overlooked the rear of the inn. "I'm sorry for calling you a jackass and for gossiping. It's an unbecoming trait, and perhaps one I should not be so quick to utilize." "And?" said Sumi. "And," I said with a deep breath, "when you called me a little boy, it made me feel lonely. When I thought you were going to kick me out, I felt so scared of losing what I've gained here. I care about you, and about Sumi." The dwarf clucked her tongue, which I took as an indication to move on to another topic. "And even Furrier," I threw in quickly. "And all our silly patrons. When I brought up those things about your past, I think it was because I wanted to know you. Know you better, I mean. To feel that we were connected. I wished to make a home of your inn. I just went about it improperly, and I apologize." "Thank you, Torsen. That is being very courageous." Sumi looked at me earnestly. "Very brave." I cleared my throat and tried to smile. Tears were waiting behind my eyes, so I blinked and looked this way and that, giving them time to dissipate. It was an emotional moment, without question, but I believe the tears came because, for once, I had been honest with myself. What I'd said was true, and I did not doubt it or obscure it. In my heart, I did want to be here, for however long, and make a home of the Green Crow. The honesty produced relief. "Kalka?" Sumi nodded at the innkeeper and took a seat in one of the chairs against the far wall of the office. Had she felt anything, as I did, Kalka could not, or would not, show it. Her sharp, Gindi face was still, and her hands were folded in businesslike fashion. The blushing coloration had faded. "Thank you," she murmured, and there was a stiff pause before the conversation shifted to pragmatic issues. "I do honestly appreciate your saying the things you said, and I feel you are a part of the Green Crow, in some respects. I forgive you, fully, and yet you stole from a guest." She lifted her hand when I began protesting, pleading my innocence, that it was an unfortunate accident. "I don't doubt your sincerity," she said. "It would be very out of character for you to simply steal something maliciously. Accident or not, you still stole, and that I cannot tolerate from anyone who works here at my inn." Gutted. The bubbling warmth of connection I had felt just a moment ago poured out of me as if her words had stabbed a hole in my very person. "You can stay and see to the completion of your festival," she went on. "I've paid for the beer, anyway." Another stab wound. I heard Sumi sigh behind me. "But after the turn of the year you should go. It would be best," Kalka said. And for the killing blow, she added, "You are more trouble than you're worth, Torsen. You are a liability, and one that cannot be left at my inn, not when I've so much to lose." From the corner of my eye, it appeared that Sumi had covered her face with her hand. I went numb. Kalka's apology now felt hollow. Had it actually been a sincere apology, it must have, for her, been too bitter to stand alone, so she had to pepper it with these insults as petty vengeance. Perhaps it was best for me to leave her then. Perhaps I belonged back in the capitals, a servitor to my family and its name. Perhaps there was no home here at the Green Crow Inn, not while Kalka remained its keeper. Dull shouts and grunts could be heard through the closed office window. There was a fierce snarling and laughter coming from the rear lawn. Had Kalka any more harsh words queued up for me, they were left unsaid, for she rose with incredible speed and went to the window. Without a word, but with the same amazing swiftness, she snatched the broadsword from the wall and departed. The debilitating angst I felt began to subside as I rose and looked out the window. "Torsen, I am so sorry." Sumi was in tears, near to weeping, in fact. "Oh, Sumi, really, No! This was my idea, and I should have been knowing Kalka was not ready," she said between sobs. "She is being so stubborn when she is mad, but she is actually a very sweet person, if you—" "Sumi," I took her by the hand and looked into her sad, tear-soaked face. "You did a good thing, but I don't believe now is the time to debrief. Come to the yard when you're ready." I nearly flew down the stairs, leaving Sumi to collect herself. In a moment, I was at the back door, looking down from the small rear porch upon an unfathomable scene. Furrier lay splayed on the cold ground, his head propped against the wheel of our little wagon. He was nursing his jaw, and it appeared a bit of blood was seeping from a wound on the top of his head. At the edge of sight, through a break in the widely spaced ring of trees, were Catchpole and Hobbler in apparent flight, their forms cast black against the blue sky of the horizon. Closing in on them, like a bird of prey, was Kalka. Her torso leaned slightly forward, her arms hung back, and her sword, now drawn, shone behind her, glittering in the sunshine. Her legs were a blur, carrying her sinewy frame towards the trolls with alacritous vengeance. I could not believe it. Hopping down to the ground, I knelt beside Furrier. "Oh my! Furrier, are you hurt?"
"Of course I'm hurt, you daft prick!" he spat.
"Well, yes, I mean, do you need—"
"Go and help Kalka before she gets herself killed!"
I nodded and raced away. A few steps in, I realized I had no weapon, no fighting skills of which to speak, and no plan. On I went. One of the trolls shouted something like, "Gone!" He turned and raised his fingers in a very impolite gesture, and in so doing, realized his peril. Kalka was not far from them now, and if anything, she was moving even faster than before. Her skirt snapped about her knees as a sail snaps in the ocean wind. The lengthy green brutes, who had been walking after their apparent attack on Furrier, put on speed and loped forward in great strides. But it was not enough. I myself was only halfway to the tree ring and feeling winded. Were I to arrive in time to help Kalka, I would probably drop dead from exhaustion. As it so happened, she would need no help. Catchpole, the taller of the two, snapped his head back a few times, gauging the situation. It must have become clear that they could not outpace their pursuer, so they turned to face her. Hobbler drew a curved dagger, and I gasped, which actually cost me a few more breaths. I coughed loudly and slowed my pace. A small distance beyond the tree ring, the trolls stood in the brown winter grass, hunched and ready for a fight. Kalka raced on towards them and did not slow. Once in earshot, the monstrous Catchpole shouted,
"Oi! What do you think you're doing, you little—"
If he'd had a brutal taunt ready, as is the wont of trolls, he never got to use it. Without sound or warning, Kalka shifted her hips and swung her shoulders, and whatever mockery Catchpole was ready to unleash changed into a loathsome shriek. Her terrible blade cut into his chest and black blood came out, spattering her arm as she dashed by. Hobbler lunged forward with his knife, but was not quick enough. Kalka skidded to a halt, kicking up dirt, and spun to face them with her blade poised at the ready. The muscles on her arms showed like tree bark. I stopped running altogether at a safe distance and stared. Catchpole clutched at his chest and grunted. Hobbler put a hand to his friend's shoulder, but his eyes were locked on Kalka. He pointed his knife at her. "If I ever see either of you again," she said sternly but evenly. She wasn't even breathing hard. "Or so much as hear of you coming within a league of Nawari, I will make that wound feel like a kitten's scratch. Now leave while I let you." Catchpole still held a hand to his chest, but seemed otherwise capable of departure. Hobbler supported his friend, and his eyes did not break away from Kalka. They walked slowly around her, giving her a wide berth, then backed away slowly until there was space enough for them to go on without fear of reprisal. Hobbler shouted,
"See if we don't come back! Nubhorn and the boys'll make brief work of ya!"
Kalka rose from her ready stance and stood erect with the broadsword hanging at her side. The chilling wind whipped her hair here and there like a cat of nine tails. Her clothes billowed, giving her the look of a mythical warrior. Not an innkeeper, and if I had been intimidated by her before, I was in awe of her now. Back at the inn, a small crowd gathered, mostly patrons, but also a few townsfolk who had heard of the scuffle. Sumi Kind was seeing to Furrier, now back on his feet with a cloth held to his head. Black blood seeped through white cloth. He looked dejected at best. I nodded at him, but he made no reply. Kalka had been standing as a sentinel within the tree ring for many minutes, ensuring the trolls were on their way. She walked back slowly, a small but deadly figure steadily approaching the Green Crow. A blur raced past us, heading towards Kalka. One patron gasped. It was Shaitan, with blade drawn. The warrior's sprint slowed to a trot as she determined the danger was far away. Reaching Kalka, she grasped the innkeeper's arm and they spoke, too far away for the rest of us to hear. Then Shaitan brushed aside Kalka's hair, patted her cheek, and together they walked towards us. Isru appeared at the corner of the inn, reviewing affairs from a distance. The sprightly girl breathed hard, as if she had been running as well. Gilrad walked up from the stables, casually snacking on an apple. After a long and especially crunchy bite, he said, cheerfully and with mouth full,
"Hello, all. What's going on?"
We all turned and stared at him. This has been The Green Crow Inn by Derek A. Kamal, read by Kalman Friedman, with music by Michael Elliott. To find out more, including how to purchase your copy of the novel, please visit shorelessskies.com.